Union Pacific 4014, the Big Boy. It is the latest and largest steam locomotive to join the Union Pacific steam program. In the last volume, we chased the giant as it ran from Boone, Iowa to Mason City, Iowa, across mostly the old Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Main Line, as well as some Chicago and Northwestern lines. In this final volume, we finish our chase of the world's largest steam locomotive as it runs from Mason City, Iowa to St. Paul, Minnesota. North of Manly, Iowa, we see the Iowa Northern's two ex-Rock Island E units next to the Big Boy, as well as some more mainline action as well. Well, let's finish what we started back in Omaha and finish this chase of the Big Boy. The date is July 17th, 2019, and we are at the 310th Street Railroad crossing north of Mason City, Iowa. Today would be our last day of chasing the Big Boy as it continued its run across the spine line from Mason City, Iowa to St. Paul, Minnesota over the Albert Lea subdivision. After some time of waiting, we then saw the headlights of 4014 and watched as the giant drew closer before ultimately passing us at the crossing.
You're going to get run over, or does it just go over it?
Oh, it just runs right over it, basically.
Oh my God.
It doesn't take it up.
Cool. That is so cool. I want to see it. Where's it going to be?
Oh, it's hopefully going to be on my YouTube channel, actually, when I get paid. Ohio Pacific Productions.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Ohio? I don't have my big zoom on, so I can't see that. Oh, look at this guy down there in the hole. See him?
I see him.
Like, no. No. This is actually too close for me. You want to be moving. Trains are big.
They really are.
No, this guy's small. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, right? Crazy lady, anyway. You do a video?
I figured the stills, I think, the one standing still.
I just
That's when it's steep. Once they get moving.
I didn't get it good.
Yeah. Just about everywhere you go, I found there's a lot of freaking people
I
around.
know. It's true. I didn't want them in my shot, though. I'll try to take a video of it.
we leave the crossing, I also got this GoPro shot of 4014 as it ran over my camera. After seeing the big boy there, we then continued up the road. Just north of Manly, Iowa, we were just about to pass the 380th Street Railroad crossing until something caught my eye. Next to the Union Pacific Main Line was Iowa Northern 630 and 652, two ex-Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific E units. We then got to watch as 4014 came to a stop next to the beautiful E units for a photo shoot. While we admire all three locomotives, let's talk about the E units here. Iowa Northern 630 is an EMD E6A, built in 1941. It was the fourth out of 5 E6As built for the Rock Island, numbered from 627 to 631. Although the engines were originally made to pull specifically the Rocky Mountain Rocket between Chicago, Illinois and Denver/Colorado Springs, Colorado, they eventually would be found pulling many of the Rock Island's passenger trains across their system, perhaps even being seen on this very line, pulling the Rock Island's Kansas City Rocket between Kansas City, Missouri and Minneapolis, Minnesota. Behind 630 is Iowa Northern 652, which is an EMD E8A, built in 1952, for the Rock Island. 652 was the 9th out of 13 E8As built for the railroad, numbered from 644 to 656. The E8As were made to help pull the Rock Island's many passenger trains. They were even paired up with the older E6As that pulled them. 652 is most well known for being painted in 1976 in the Rock Island's bicentennial independence paint scheme to celebrate the United States' 200th birthday. 630 and 652 both stayed on the Rock Island all the way up till its bankruptcy in 1980. Eventually, both engines would end up on the Midland Railway in Kansas, which operated out of Baldwin. They pulled the railroad's many tourist trains until 2005, when both engines were retired from service and stored at the railroad, more than likely due to mechanical issues. Both engines stayed there until 2012, when both 630 and 652 were sold to the Iowa Northern Railway and moved to the Mid-America Car and Locomotive Works in Kansas City for repair and repaint. It took some time, but eventually in 2017, both 630 and 652 came out of the shop fresh in their Rock Island paint schemes you see before us, and they were delivered via the Canadian Pacific Railway to their new owners, the Iowa Northern Railway. As of today, as far as I was able to research, both engines are being used as display pieces at the Manly Junction Railway Museum, which is affiliated with the Iowa Northern Railway. Both engines don't work, but the railway hopes to have them operational sometime in the future. While 4014 was here, Ed Dickens climbed onto the front of 4014 to rewrite Big Boy onto the smokebox door. The chalk writing was erased the day before due to the rain. After the photo shoot is over, 4014 then got back underway, continuing its journey to the Twin Cities. After getting some more photos of the two E-units, we then got back on the road. We then got some great pacing action of 4014 along Route 65 as we chased the Giant into the state of Minnesota. After crossing the state border, 4014 began to slow down to enter into a siding. So we drove ahead and got set up at the north end of the siding at the 120th Street Railroad crossing just north of the small community of Gordonsville, Minnesota. At this end of the siding, the Union Pacific Railroad calls this place CP U-242, North Gordon. 4014 was stopped here to allow a southbound Union Pacific freight train to pass the excursion. Leading the freight train was Union Pacific 5883, a GE AC-44 CWCTE built in 2002, 8776, an EMD SD-70 ACE, and 4822, an EMD SD-70M, also built in 2002. As usual, this freight train contains a variety of freight cars, ranging from grain cars to box cars and many other kinds.
We're laying it on everybody. No kidding. Oh, wow.
as the end of this train draws closer, there were some ex-Southern Pacific boxcars on the end. Once the freight train got past on the siding, 4014 was then given permission to continue north up the line.
Can this camera do video? Can you take a video? After seeing the big boy here, we then continued up the road. We then stopped again at the T-153 Road railroad crossing just north of the subdivision's namesake town of Albert Lea, Minnesota. By the time we got here, dark clouds began to loom overhead, but those clouds wouldn't be what got us wet here. After a little bit of time, we then began to see the smoke plumes from 4014, and got to watch as the Giant climbed the grade out of Albert Lea, Minnesota.
He's on hammer right now.
He's on hammer, not now?
You can see the smoke.
No. That's far enough out. That ain't. That's filling now. Now what happened?
Yeah. I can see the smoke coming between the trees.
Yeah, it looks like a tornado.
Is that from that?
Yeah, he's probably got the oil cranked up to get a good run at it.
No, you got a good grade coming into hammer too.
Not really, not for that thing.
Not for that thing.
I seen a light.
Yeah, and he's gonna be hard. He had to bleed so much off there when he stopped. He's got to get everything warm back up with pressure.
You gotta get pictures.
Scratch it out. Going up the hill. Yep. Stand in the middle of the road, you'll be a bug on a bumper.
No, I don't want to do that.
After getting drenched by the big boy, we then caught the train again at the small town of Hope, Minnesota. Here, the town has a giant grain elevator owned by Sun Opta Grains and Foods. It's used to load grain trains that run on the Albert Lea subdivision. We then got to watch as 4014 thundered by the giant grain elevators in town. Once 4014 got through Hope, we then caught back up with the Giant at its next stop in Owatonna, Minnesota. Here, we got set up with all the rail fans and residents of the town at the West School Street Railroad crossing and got to watch as 4014 pulled to a stop here.
Here it comes right here. We parked yeah, that's what I read too. Cool.
coming out.
Once 4014 came to a stop, we then broke off to grab some lunch here. After lunch, we then drove back into town and got set up in Morehouse Park, where the old Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Main Line crosses the Straits River right next to the West Bridge Street Railroad crossing. This railroad bridge is called the Straits River Bridge No. 4, as there are 5 other bridges on the Albert Lea subdivision that also cross the Straits River. It was built in 1902 and has been used by the Rock, the Northwestern, and now the Union Pacific Railroad. The big building with the 3 funnels in the background is the Owatonna Public Utilities, aka the Owatonwa Power Plant. Just downstream from the Straits River Bridge No. 4 is the much newer Morehouse Park Pedestrian Bridge, built in 1989. As the residents and rail fans awaited for 4014 to come across the bridge, the geese here just kept doing what they were doing, either resting on the other side of the river or swimming in the river itself. Although they were trying their best, it's a little tricky trying to swim upriver. After some time passed, we then heard the whistle of 4014 and got to watch as the big boy crossed the 117-year-old bridge as of the filming of this video. After 4014 got out of town, we then hopped on Interstate Highway 35 and caught the train again at the Road 9 railroad crossing
a little north of Faribault, Minnesota. Before we left the crossing, I managed to get one last GoPro shot of the train running over my camera. As soon as 4014 got past, we then got back on the road and saw the train again as it pulled in to Northfield, Minnesota. Here the train will stop one more time before reaching St. Paul. As a quick side note, from here to Rosemount, Minnesota, part of the Union Pacific's Albert Lea subdivision runs on Canadian Pacific trackage, which is marked in red on the map. After the train came to a stop, my dad, brother, and I decided to go ahead of the train and go directly to its final destination of St. Paul, Minnesota. St. Paul, the capital city of Minnesota, it is the second largest city in the state and the 11th largest in the Midwest. St. Paul is also well known for being right next to Minnesota's biggest city, Minneapolis, across the mighty Mississippi River, giving both cities the nickname the Twin Cities. Minneapolis is just west of St. Paul. After getting our reservations at the hotel together, we then headed down to St. Paul Union Depot, where 4014 was scheduled to arrive. Union Depot was constructed between 1917 and 1923, and today is the city's main transportation hub,
with both buses, trams, and even Amtrak, with their Empire Builder serving the station. With 4014 scheduled to be on display here the next day, the depot was going to host a train expo during the event and was in the process of getting the tables for the vendors together. We are now underneath the Highway 52 bridge just east of Union Depot. Here, we and many other people were gathered here to watch as 4014's excursion train backed down the Y towards Union Depot. Once 4014 came to a stop, we got to watch as the crew of the train connected the tender to the tanker truck right next to the train in order to reload 4014's tender with a fresh load of oil.
As they were loading 4014 with oil, other crew members of the train did general maintenance around 4014. While the crew was doing all this, we then walked down to the Union Depot Rail Viewing Picnic Area, a great place to watch trains in the St. Paul area. When we got down here, we caught BNSF 251 and 1474 as they headed west on BNSF's Midway subdivision. We'll talk about the history of these two locomotives here in a minute. Just after the two BNSF locomotives got by, we then saw two more trains waiting at the Y, a Canadian Pacific train on CP's Miriam subdivision, and what appeared to be another BNSF train again on the Midway subdivision. The first one to depart was the CP train, led by CP 2302, 2288, and UP 8139. While we were focused on the Canadian Pacific train, BNSF allowed the other BNSF train on the Midway sub to depart. Anyway, CP 2302 and 2288 are both EMD GP20C-Ecos, built around 2014. The GP20C-Ecos are classified as BB road switcher diesel locomotives and can generate 2,000 horsepower. They are designed to follow Canadian Pacific's crashworthiness standards and the EPA's emission standards, hence the Eco in the name. Despite these engines having new frames, new fuel tanks, new long hoods, and new cabs, these engines use just enough older components from other engines to classify them as rebuilds, as they use the trucks, prime movers, and alternators that came from the retired Canadian Pacific EMD GP9s. Canadian Pacific is the only railroad that owns these locomotives. As you just saw, our train came to a stop. After some more time of waiting around, we finally decided to head back to the hotel. Along our journey, we ended up alongside the Mississippi River on Shepherd/Warner Road/Road 37, and just at that time, we got a front row seat as 4014 backed down the main line to enter into Union Depot. As the excursion train rolls back, let's get back to the CP train and the BNSF locomotives we saw back at the picnic area.
Union Pacific 8139 is a GE ES44AC-H, also built in 2014. Getting back to the BNSF engines we saw before, BNSF 251 is an EMD SD75M, built in 1995. It was originally built as part of an order for BNSF's predecessor, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, but didn't get delivered to the railroad till just after the BNSF merger. The SD75Ms have the distinction of being the very last class of locomotives ordered and delivered to the Santa Fe, with 51 out of the 76 getting delivered to the railroad just before the BNSF merger. BNSF 1474 is an EMD SD60M, built in 1991 for BNSF's other predecessor, the Burlington Northern Railroad, as their 9297. This engine has the nickname the Great Pumpkin due to the dark green and orange paint scheme it wears. The reason why it has this paint scheme is because when the BNSF merger happened, this engine was given one of BNSF's first experimental paint schemes. After 4014 came to a stop,
We then went back to our hotel to sleep the night. The next day, we found ourselves exploring the St. Paul area rail fanning and visiting 4014 on display at Union Depot, but we'll save that for another video. For now, we are finally at the end of our 3-day odyssey of chasing 4014. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this chase of the world's largest operational steam locomotive. We certainly had a blast just watching 4014 as it rolled across both the Iowa and Minnesota landscapes. Ed Dickens and the crew of the Union Pacific Steam Program did a fantastic job on the restoration of the Big Boy 4014, and I wish them the best of luck and many more years of operation with both 4014 and 844. We'll certainly try to get back out there whenever Union Pacific announces another round of their excursions with either 844 or 4014. Again, I hope everyone has enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys have a good day. See you later!